Welcome back to Counting the Cost, your weekly business stop here on Al Jazeera. I'm Kamahl Santamaria. We turn our focus to India now, 1 year after an extraordinary attack on the city of Mumbai. It was a siege which not only left 166 people dead and more than 300 injured, it left countless more wondering if India's financial capital could actually recover. Al Jazeera's Sahil Rahman is in Mumbai for the 1 year anniversary of the attacks. He's been finding out how business is bouncing back.
The attacks on Mumbai in November 2008 could not have come at a worse time for the Indian economy. Stock markets had already plunged more than 50%, hit by the global recession. The attacks, just a kilometre away from the heart of Mumbai's financial district, added to the crisis. India's security problems lay exposed.
We are seeing today a little bit of a stability.
But the chairman of one of India's largest financial institutions says it's not dented the country's position as a secure investment destination.
India showed a tremendous amount of resilience when this event happened. And if you look at the way the market behaved, of course the market had to be closed for 1 day. And when it reopened, the market reacted very well. In the sense that nobody was worried about any long-term impact of these events.
2008 saw attacks not just in Mumbai, but also in Jaipur, Surat, and there were bomb scares in Delhi. There were fears the violence would hit industry hard. But Mr. Sinha says these fears were unfounded.
A very good gauge of this would be the amount of FIIs flows into the country. And if you look at the month-on-month flow, you will be surprised that even in the month of December 2008, we had a positive flow. As early as December 2008. The event happened in November last year. In December, we had a positive flow.
It's a view shared by the tourism and hospitality industry. The owner of Leopold Cafe, a target of last year's attacks and a popular tourist attraction, says business will always bounce back. It's just a matter of time.
Life goes on, like you have to look for the better, you cannot just sit back, and no doubt after all this incident, whatever has happened, like with good wishes, with prayers, and with the strong support of my tourists, of my customers from all over the world, customers from all over India, they have again come back to my restaurant to show their solidarity, their support, and this is where we are back to normal and much better than that.
India is an economic powerhouse in the region and along with China, Brazil and Russia now commands a greater share of the world's wealth. But unlike its BRIC counterparts, India has more internal political strife. But experts say these sorts of incidents do not affect the long-term prospects of the country.
I suspect it's a little bit like a speed breaker. So your car is cruising along and there is an attack and that's the speed breaker there. So you kind of slow down, you go over it and then you kind of resume. Now I guess the fear is if there are a lot of these, then you're what in India you call a rumble strip, so you kind of bounce around a little bit, and that will slow things down.
The Bombay Stock Exchange itself was hit by terrorism in 1993. Back then, an attack on India's main stock market completely shattered the country's fledgling financial sector. But India was not the financial powerhouse then, but it is today. India has learnt to manage its economy despite repeated attacks on its soil. This is the Mumbai Stock Exchange, and the Sensex, the Mumbai Stock Index, stood at 9,000 points last year. 12 months on, it's practically double. It seems to reflect a growing confidence in India's economy, which continues to attract foreign investment. I'm Sahil Rahman in Mumbai for Counting the Cost.
So no surprise then, with Mumbai's wounds still fresh, that security was high on the agenda at a meeting between India's Prime Minister Manmohan Singh and the US President Barack Obama. But also, given India's sheer size and population and its increasing influence in the world, economic and business ties weren't far behind. Shia Britanzi is in our Washington Broadcast Center with more on that.
Thanks, Kamahl. One of the defining partnerships of the 21st century. That was how US President Barack Obama characterized the US's relationship with growing power India. India has been concerned it's slipping down the foreign policy agenda against rivals like Pakistan and China, the Obama administration's top priorities. However, Washington sees India as a counterweight to an increasingly assertive China. Obama treated India's Prime Minister Manmohan Singh to his first state visit of his presidency. The two leaders came together to discuss Afghanistan, climate change and their nuclear partnership. And their growing economic ties were also on the agenda.
As leading economies, the United States and India can strengthen the global economic recovery promote trade that creates jobs for both our people, and pursue growth that is balanced and sustained. As nuclear powers, we can be full partners in preventing the spread of the world's most deadly weapons, securing loose nuclear materials from terrorists, and pursuing our shared vision of a world without nuclear weapons.
The world's two biggest democracies became close economic allies over the last 15 years. While the two-way trade in 1990 was just $5 billion and then $14 billion in 2000, commerce rose to more than $40 billion in 2008. US companies are keenly awaiting the opening up of India's $150 billion power plant market. Singh wants the US and India to complete the 2005 nuclear cooperation deal that would open up the market to investment. Both countries agreed to work together on clean energy projects like wind, solar and geothermal power. The Indian economy, though, was hit by the global economic crisis. In 2008, growth moderated to 6.7%. This year, the economy is expected to expand by 6.5%. But within 3 years, growth is forecast to get back to 9%. Joining me now in the studio, Inder Sood. He's an economist and professor of international affairs at George Washington University, and Ron Summers, president of the US-India Business Council. Professor Sood, if I can begin with you, it's fascinating to see that in the old days, India was seen as a defender of the developing world against globalization, a bulwark against neoliberalism, defending developing countries and so on. But that seems to have entirely slipped away. Are they entirely on board now with neoliberal globalization?
I think you can say that with the fall of the Soviet Union and with the changing world situation, India has adjusted. And India has adjusted very much towards the direction of free market economy. Now, that doesn't mean that India doesn't have remnants of socialism from time to time.
But even in the last few years, they went at the WTO negotiations, they were seen as saying, no, hang on, we're not going to go this far.
Well, India plays this delicate balance. For many years, as you mentioned, it used to see itself as a champion of the developing world. But more and more, India sees its own economic interest as the first priority as well. And trying to balance the two sometimes is a challenge. So in WTO negotiations, you will see India play a role, which is, you can say, as a champion of the world, developing world, but not inconsistent with its own interests, services, agriculture, and so on.
Ron Summers, though, I mean, you were closely involved, I think, with some of the negotiations on the civilian nuclear deal. Was there a quid pro quo? It was, give us the civil nuclear deal and we'll drop our objections to WTO things, we'll lower tariffs and so forth.
Not at all. I mean, in the end, it was the end of 35 years of technology denial regime that we had helped construct against India. So it was removing the cinder from the eye and really unleashing the economic relationship.
Right, but completely disregarding the principles of the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty. Obviously, the US thought it was going to get something in return, that being perhaps a much nicer face at WTO negotiations over the table with US negotiators.
No, there was no quid pro quo at all, in the sense that India, Mr. Anand Sharma, the new Minister of Commerce, he's agreed to move forward very productively at the upcoming
It's raised a lot of
round.
eyebrows in the developing world.
But in the end, it really is now about economic cooperation and the unleashing of these two powerful economies that will now be partners that will shape the economic destiny of the 21st century.
But this is the suspicion, Professor, that India is perhaps bending over a bit too backwards in its embrace of globalization. For example, on the nuclear deal, the liability law that's going through that means that US companies won't be held liable for any accidents, and memories of Bhopal immediately come up. The fact that farmers are being forced off their land to make way for a nuclear plant that will soon be built by American companies and they're resisting. Will there be any bumps along the way, do you think?
Well, in a democracy like India, you can always expect bumps. There's never be smooth sailing, there's never a straight line. But I think the general trajectory is clear. The trajectory is free market economy, open economy, but at the same time, a very delicate issue in India of balancing income distribution. So you will see the government take actions from time to time, which would appear to go against free market principles. Economic zones, for example, under severe criticism right now. Have they really helped the poor? So we have to realize in India, given the disparities in income, given the still very vast number of poor people, you'll never have a free-fettered, free economy.
Right, but I mean,
UNICEF
came out with a report a few months ago that said during the last period of boom, so-called, the number of those living in hunger in India between 2005 and 2008 rose by 20 million. This was during a period of neoliberal economic reform and the unfettered access that you're also keen on. I mean, who is this good for? Is it for Walmart, Monsanto, for Harley-Davidson and so on, or is it for the actual poor?
No,
Are those being pushed off their land, and for those who might be the victim of nuclear accidents in the future?
Well, first and foremost, it's good for the poor. You have to realize in the last 10 years, India has lifted more people out of poverty than ever before in the previous 10 years or 20 years. So it's good for the poor. Nevertheless, an Achilles heel of India is the income disparities. And I think the government, in fact, is well aware that in this rising tides, you do create pockets of disparity of the kind you mentioned. And I think those are the things which Indians need to address very carefully. And the American government needs to be cognizant that those realities are very important in the Indian context.
Those bumps that the professor was talking about, do they worry the American investment community at all? Actually, just a month ago, Manmohan Singh was talking about sharing green technology and without patents and so forth, in the same way that HIV/AIDS drugs were shared amongst developing countries because this is a global emergency. Does that cause worry amongst those in your group?
Well, first of all, everybody understands that there's a need for inclusive growth. In other words, the disparities that the professor was referring to.
But it was under inclusive growth that 30 more million people became hungry in India in the last few years. That policy's been going on for some time.
Keep in mind that India's been increasing in population as well, so as the professor has mentioned, it's actually lifted more people out of poverty during that same period. Dr. Manmohan Singh, really, that whole expansion has been quite remarkable in alleviating poverty. In terms of the compulsory licensing issues, we have to protect intellectual property. We have to understand that licensing agreements have to be entered into. But the collaborations that are going to happen are not just for India and the United States. It's going to become the platform, the two of these countries, that help create green technologies for the world.
Another potential source of worry, one would think, is regional instability. This is still not the most, well, I suppose, I mean, there's a little bit amount of fear when you look at that part of the map. Does that come into the thoughts of your members as they think of US and Indian investment and so forth?
Again, we're all very conscious of the fact that just a year ago we had 2611 in Mumbai, but that's happening all around the world, and we're all very conscious of such issues nowadays. Bottom line is that we have a brand new Obama administration. We have a brand new elected UPA government in India that just had their major elections in May. So we have 2 full terms ahead of us where everybody is supportive of an economic growth reform as well as stronger US-India ties.
Ron Summers, Professor Inder Sood, thank you both very much.
And that is just about it for this week, but do check us out online when you get the chance. Head to aljazeera.net/English. Hit the program's link. You'll find the Counting the Cost page and catch up with some of our previous episodes there and a blog on this week's show. But that's it from Counting the Cost. I'm Kamahl, Santamaria from the whole team. Thanks for joining us. See you next time.